You're listening to the What's Up podcast with Adam Brenner. Welcome to the What's Up podcast. I'm your host, Adam Brenner, where I seek out what's up in your community, your state, your nation, and your world. On today's show, Season 1, Episode 1, we are going to be talking about post-traumatic stress disorder. My guest today is Harriet Wilkin. She is a pastor and a widow of a first responder and veteran. Harriet has self-studied post-traumatic stress disorder and has a master's degree in theology and has been serving as a pastor for the last decade in rural and suburban communities. On this episode, Harriet will tell you how her and her husband dealt with post-traumatic stress disorder and how they came to an understanding about it and how Harriet was able to help her husband with his post-traumatic stress disorder. Harriet will also talk about communication that is necessary between family members and somebody with post-traumatic stress disorder. And Harriet will also tell you how you can help people who have post-traumatic stress disorder and what is needed to help them get better and be at peace of mind. But I tell you folks, like post-traumatic stress disorder, something I worry about as a first responder, and I worry about my other first responders and my friends who are first responders, skin cancer. Skin cancer, in addition to post-traumatic stress disorder, is really killing us because we're always out in the sun. We're always working in the sun, whether it's in the field of a military personnel, if doing training, or actually on a call for a first responder. And not only that, first responders and military vets, besides the sun damage that's done to their skin, we also have a lot of chemicals that absorb on our skin. So I worry a lot about skin cancer. But there is a solution, and that's the Molly's Fund, who I've worked closely with a lot of times, and it helps me to worry a little less. The Molly's Fund is an organization that supplied all New Jersey fire academies with sunscreen dispensers to try to mitigate the effects of sun damage and chemical damage on the body. Just amazing stuff. Amazing stuff. They help my brother and sister firefighters. They've also helped military veterans. And the Molly's Funds also has helped me with training, understanding about skin cancer. So they're really a great organization. And you can also learn how to protect yourself from skin cancer. Do what I and many others in the military and emergency services do, which is contact the Molly's Fund at mollysfund.org. Amazing organization. That ties in to what we're talking about today, first responders, dealing with first responders and dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder in first responders and vets. And it's just two things to really worry about. Talk about, the physical health of skin cancer, and we talk about the mental health with post-traumatic stress disorder. So let's bring our guest in, Harriet Wilkin. Harriet, thanks for being here today. Thanks for joining us to talk about post-traumatic stress disorder.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start. So for people who don't know, I know a lot of people have heard about post-traumatic stress disorder, but what is post-traumatic stress disorder?
So to understand more about PTSD, it's understanding that there has been a trauma, something has wounded the brain. And it can be from a shooting, a stabbing that someone has witnessed, someone who's getting hurt or being killed at a scene. It could be from a traffic accident, the inability to sometimes even do a rescue of someone, the loss of a coworker. All these things add up, and it has created a wound on the brain. And from that, to actually be diagnosed with PTSD, you have to see a professional therapist to be diagnosed properly and also then be able to receive the treatment needed.
So you talk about a wound to the brain. So I know, if we're in our bodies, anybody, we get a cut, we get a bruise on something. But you said this isn't like an acute effect to the mind. It's something that happens over time that people, that first responders, military vets, even regular people can get post-traumatic stress disorder. What does it do to the body? Or what does it do to the body and the mind? What is going on? Because we don't see a physical bruise, we don't see a cut, we don't see a broken leg or anything, but what is going on? The actual thing that it's doing to the brain that affects these first responders.
Being that I was a spouse of a first responder and veteran, I saw the effects through him. Jim experienced it because the symptoms persisted for more than a month. It persisted for many years in his life. He would respond to a call, but those calls continued to be in his mind. And so that wound was always being reopened and never fully been able to heal. And that's part of our bodies remember our wounds. They remember what things are going on within ourselves. And sometimes it's really hard to let go of the negativity that's in our life. And we try to compensate as much as we can. In most cases, first responders and veterans, they become numb, they say, to the situation or as the situations build up. But there's so much that the body and brain can take of that. And it's just also affects every aspect then of the person's life.
Yeah, I know a lot of military vets and people currently in the military and first responders, whether it's fire, EMS, police. Everybody say, "Hey, I got this." It's part of the job. It's part of the job, but it really shouldn't be part of the job to just deal with it. It should be part of the job to actually get help for it, because I know there's been first responders and vets that I know that if a tragic event happens that they had to deal with, and it was either to them, somebody they were helping, or one of their team members, if there was a song or something playing at that time, they can never play that song again. Even if they love the band, like if it was the Beatles playing and something horrific happened either right before or during, and they heard that song, these are triggers that really set them off and can, so talk about that for a second if you can. These triggers, how to deal with them and everything, and also what can be done to overcome these triggers. What should these first responders, vets, or anybody else with post-traumatic stress disorder be doing?
Again, I'm taking it from a perspective of being a spouse and also from a pastor's perspective. But what I have seen, even with my own late husband, was the fact that the triggers were always there, but initially he never told me much about the PTSD. It was never even defined early on in our marriage, because back in those days they didn't talk about it. And so now you have more opportunities of being able to talk about it and having those discussions. And so when those triggers happen, people don't know, and sometimes even the first responder and veteran doesn't know what might be a trigger. But when somebody lashes out, it's not about being angry at a specific thing or a situation. It is that something has been triggered, a memory, and it's going back to that traumatic situation that has then wounded the brain that I talked about earlier, because either they witnessed something or that music has brought back a certain vision in their minds and of someone who was injured, someone that was hurt, and or something that was going to personally happen to them while they were on the job. All those things build up over time, and it could be something as easily as hearing a certain noise could trigger the PTSD. And again, from being a pastor and a spouse, and you don't know sometimes that a clanging of a dish might trigger a PTSD moment for that first responder or veteran. One of the things is fireworks. That will even trigger things, especially for veterans who have been in the battlefield. I know from my husband, he witnessed different traumatic events that he covered as a paramedic, and coming up to a scene and responding, he put that person first and foremost, and he couldn't wait to make sure they were taken care of. He wanted to make sure that they had all their needs taken care of first. He would put his at risk to make sure they were taken care of. And so you never know what situation that might be present in a conversation. It could be even a movie. A clip in a movie could trigger something. A certain scene could attract that vision from something that had happened. They were working.
Yeah, well, two things it made me think of. The first thing is I know with my post-traumatic stress disorder that I have a lot of, if there's some type of noise or whatever, and that may be from all my years of firefighting with the alarm going off. So our bodies are kind of like tuned. It's like ringing the dinner bell and everybody comes to the table when you. For me, and I jump. I mean, I get very jumpy and everything. But you mentioned something else very important is that first responders, whether it's fire, EMS, police, or military, their whole lives and jobs are geared to helping other people before they help themselves. How can we turn that corner with what you dealt with your husband and the other people you've seen with PTSD? How do we, because the most important thing is for them to get help. How do we get them to get help for themselves?
So one of the things that I personally know, my husband, he's from the older generation where you didn't talk about the situations or how things, there was no debriefings, there was none of that like there is now. There was a couple years ago even, when I would search on Amazon or different other book sites, there was no books written by other first responders and veterans or even family members describing what they were going through. And I think that is a lot about what it is. We got to get rid of the stigma and let them people know it's okay not to be okay, as one PSA first responder did several years ago during COVID, when she was noticing that even teenagers were dealing, with all the effects of COVID and everything. But as a first responder, she was seeing, as she was going to different incidents and different suicide prevention components, was that everybody is not invisible. We're all visible. And it's a matter of being able to come forward and saying, yes, we need help, and knowing who we can go to. And sometimes it's finding that friend, finding the confidant that you can go to and say, hey, this is really a situation that's bothering me and I don't know where to go for help and I need help. But getting rid of that stigma that it's okay to ask for help is one of the big things that we need to be doing.
Okay. If you don't mind talking about your marriage to Jim, who was a military vet and a first responder, did that affect your marriage at all?
So back when he and I were first married in the early 2000s, there was no conversation about PTSD. There was no, when you're getting married, sometimes you have premarital counseling, and we didn't have any conversations about that. We didn't have any conversations about his job. That wasn't part of our counseling time. That wasn't part of what we talked about. Actually, there's a lot of times that Jim didn't want to tell me about some of the scenes that he was involved in. He wanted to keep that all to himself. And again, that goes into that generation where they didn't bring the job home necessarily with them. There was a time before I met him that his daughter remembered him coming home from a call and he was crying, and was kind of unusual for most people to do, but he did come home and he was just crying, and he didn't explain why he was crying, but he was actually letting out what he was witnessing on a call. But most of the time he kept that all to himself. And when we were first married, we were going through the normal first newlywed components of getting to know one another, understanding each other. And there were certain things that were going on. But again, I always said I was a new bride to this, and I didn't know how much his job affected his own personality, his own being, and how that would affect the marriage. As we continue just kind of going through the motions of being a married couple, there was things that I started seeing of distance himself at different times. He would get angry, and sometimes he would just walk out of the house. And sometimes one of the things that he used to do is, our vehicles are always called the rigs. And so he was always going out and washing the rigs, taking care of the rigs, making sure that our vehicles were nice and clean, even the engine compartment. It wasn't, and I didn't think much about it. He needed something to do. He needed to go and do something. Or he would fuss around the garage and clean everything up and have everything neat and tidy. He would even make sure the lawn was well manicured, to the point where he would take scissors and cut the grass so it would be all even. These were all things that were just known to be who he was, because he wanted things to look a particular way. But it was not until I attended seminary for a degree in divinity that I started understanding more about trauma, understanding more about PTSD, and that was 14 years into our marriage. And while taking a trauma and recovery course in my pastoral studies, I then went home and I said to Jim, so you have something more to tell me? And it was through that class we started reading some of the books, and as I was paying attention to the reading and kind of observing more of thinking back over our at that point 14 years of marriage, things were starting to make more sense. Things that I just knew as Jim being Jim, because his PTSD started back in 1977 when he joined the Air Force. It had gone that long, and he wasn't diagnosed with PTSD until about 2018. And so for all those years, he kept it under wraps. He kept it to himself. There was a time when I was pastoring a church and an infant passed away, and I spent many hours with the family, and I came home and he says to me, "Are you okay?" Because he knew what it was like to lose a child. He had delivered 26 children in his time of being a paramedic, and one of them died of SIDS. And so he knew the impact that it would have on the family. He knew the impact that it would have on those first responders responding to that call. He knew personally the impact that it had on his own life, and he wanted to make sure that I was okay. And yeah, I'm okay. And so he understood, and we were able to talk about certain things in ways that might be different from most couples, the more I think about it. Because when I start thinking about everything that transpired all those years years we were married, I had an opportunity to study more and understand more through going to seminary, going into the pastoral classes, and understanding the importance of the presence of ministry, the presence of being just present with a person. And it's kind of tied to my personality in some ways too, but just the opportunity just to listen. And that's what it basically came down to, is me paying attention to what Jim was going through and understanding his needs and understanding, just paying attention to what was his triggers, what was happening in his life, and just giving him space at times to figure things out for himself, and just knowing that I wasn't judging him, that I was there for him and he was there for me through it all.
Wow. That's truly amazing. And you said that, luckily he knew kind of what was going on in his job. So he understood when you had that infant death, what you were dealing with. And so you kind of were able to come together and do that. Do you see that as a normal thing for families to deal with their loved ones who have PTSD?
The more as I think about everything, Jim and I had a unique relationship. He and I had the opportunity of spending many hours together, and I always called it that we had a dance. We understood when the other person needed each other. We understood how to come in and come out of who needs to take lead at a certain time. And I think that contributed to understanding him and just not blowing him off, but just taking the time to sit with him when he wanted to sit down. Very active person. He always had to be on the go, never sitting for too long. But it's paying attention to one another. And sometimes that's hard to do, especially if you have young kids and you're trying to manage the kids, you're trying to manage work, you're trying to manage all these different things at once. And I think that kind of plays into the marriage, where Jim and I didn't have all those extra components to our marriage. It was mostly just he and I, and we had our cats. And so I was able to pay more attention to him in a unique way that maybe most people wouldn't be able to do. And he would always say, well, you know me better than I know myself. And it's because I was paying attention to his body language. I was paying attention to what was going on within him and how he was reacting to certain things. And that became very vital, especially as his health started to deteriorate in the last 8 years of his life.
So let's say that you're a husband or a wife or partner, somebody who has PTSD, and your job is at XYZ company. There's post-traumatic stress in every job and every walk of life that we do, but it's to the different degrees that is. So for somebody, a significant other who works at XYZ company and has somebody in their life, whether it's from first responder or military service or it's just regular life, and to help those families, what's the best advice that you could give them that not only they can help their loved one who's suffering from PTSD, but they can help themselves deal with all the things, the anger, the nightmares, whatever. There's so many symptoms that go with post-traumatic stress disorder. What can they do to help their loved ones who's suffering from it? And what can they do for themselves, which is going to help them both mitigate the effects of what PTSD can do to a family?
I think the biggest component is communication, and it's the verbal and nonverbal communication between couple, within a family. It goes back to not pushing it away. It is a mental health issue, and the stigma needs to change. We need to be open with one another. We need to have more understanding between each other and just accepting and loving people in our lives that might be there for a short period of time, or they might be there for a long period of time. We don't know that opportunities that we have to just share that love and care and just sometimes be there to listen and be active listening, not having other devices on, not having the radio going, not having the TV on, but actually taking time and sitting down and having conversation and being open with one another.
And I think a lot of times it's hard to put the mental disability function, whatever going on with the brain, that wound, that bruise that we talked about in the beginning of PTSD. And yes, it is going to be a burden to deal with. But as you said, open communication, love and understanding. And would you agree that, look, there are resources out there for anybody and any family member who is dealing with a PTSD, and for that person themselves, where, look, it doesn't have to be the end of your relationship. It doesn't have to be the end of your family dynamics. It doesn't have to be the end of your marriage. There are things that you can do, and if you research and communicate, those are the things that are going to be able to get you through. And that's going to help everybody, whether they suffer from it or they suffer with the person who has the post-traumatic stress disorder. Would that be a true statement?
Yes, that would be true. And that's why there needs to be even more resources. And that's one of the things that I continue to advocate for, especially since I have been pastoring in rural and suburban communities. Clergy like myself, we need to educate ourselves even more so that we can be there for our communities, be there for the different ones that have served in the military, as well as our first responders who are most of the time are volunteers. And they're doing it, they're retired and they're coming into doing the work and to support their community, or they have another job and they're running from the job when the bell goes off to go to a person's house that's caught on fire or emergency situation. We don't know all the dynamics that's going on, but again, having the resources available, even our rural and suburban communities, is going to be vital to supporting and to making sure that not only a first responder and veteran are getting the support that they need through maybe peer-to-peer support, but also that the spouses or the significant others and the families are also getting their support. Because when an incident happens and it's publicized, we're in a time of where everything is on social media, everything is on the news, things are more vital and about in our communities, that word gets around and it does then affect also the children. And so how can we best be there to support them when they know that their dad or their mom is facing a situation and that they're going to get the secondhand PTSD from that? And so we need to be more cognizant of the resources that are available, and for chaplains to get trained, and also for pastors, as I said, have opportunities to take continuing education courses in how to best support our local communities.
Wow. Well, as myself, I'm a retired firefighter, and then I also have some post-traumatic stress from my childhood, and as you Harriet, who lived with somebody with PTSD, and you suffered a little of it from yourself, as we talked about that infant death and everything. I think the best message we can get out there is that, as you said before, it's okay not to be okay, and I think a lot more of us aren't okay than we think we are. And if we come together, we get help, and we also support those people in our lives with the post-traumatic stress disorder, that we can fight the stigma, and we can also allow for mitigation and healing of one's brain, get that scar or that cut, that bruise that's on the brain that's being caused by post-traumatic stress disorder. We can mitigate that. And not only that, but I think not only can we understand the people who have it, the families that deal with it, but those families need to go out and advocate for the new families, the new people. Because look, you're always going to have first responders, you're always going to have military vets, you're always going to have other people who have post-traumatic stress disorder from something in this very hard world that we live in. And the more people that learn from it and survive the relationship, survive their marriage, survive the PTSD, they can advocate for the future generation of people with post-traumatic stress disorder, and we can overcome that stigma.
And it's also more medical research needs to be done, because PTSD also contributes to heart disease. And so there's also the link with the medical field and how it affects the physical body. That's
a lot of stuff. And, I think that's one thing that people don't realize is how it does. It not only is it, something mentally that you're dealing with and something that can affect family dynamics, but it's also medical. And I think that it's been proven that it does affect the heart and everything. And hopefully family members and the person suffering from PTSD can advocate for themselves when they go into an emergency room situation, or if they go for a yearly physical, which we all should be doing, to make sure that, we're all healthy. And, there's enough thing that causes issues with our bodies. One more thing is hopefully we can, again, mitigate what's going on with the body. Well, Harriet, I really want to thank you for being here. I think our community has learned a lot about post-traumatic stress disorder, and thank you for telling your story. I know it was very hard for you, but we do appreciate you being an advocate and somebody who's dealt with it and somebody who definitely wants to make a difference. And that's why this podcast is called What's Up, where we take a look at what's in your local community, your nation, and your world, and things that affect you and me. So you can follow us on Facebook, and you can also follow us on X, and you can find our new episodes that are published every third Monday of each month on your favorite podcasts such as Spotify and Apple. And we will look forward to letting you hear what's up in your area, your local community, your nation, your world, and find out the concerns and issues that matter to you. I'm Adam Brenner. Thank you for listening.